The Young and the Restless spoilers weekly Saturdays full episodes September 14th, 2024. The streets of Genoa City seemed brighter to Kyle Abbott lately, filled with possibilities that had once seemed out of reach. With Audra Charles ousted and his new role as CEO of Glissade firmly secured, Kyle felt an intoxicating sense of freedom and power. For the first time, he was in complete control, with no one to second-guess his decisions. He was running his own show, and the thrill of autonomy sent waves of excitement through him. But beneath that newfound confidence lay a dangerous trap, one carefully set by Victor Newman, a man Kyle trusted far too much. Kyle's blind loyalty. Victor had always known how to get into people's heads, how to exploit their weaknesses and turn them into unwitting pawns in his grand games of power. For Kyle, Victor had become more than just an ally, he was a mentor, someone who finally appreciated Kyle for who he was and gave him the respect he had always craved. Victor's words were gospel to him, and Kyle, eager to prove his worth, followed every directive without question. But Jack and Diane saw things differently. They had watched their son fall deeper under Victor's influence with growing alarm. Kyle's eagerness to please Victor had begun to cloud his judgment, pulling him away from his family and closer to a man who had always operated with his own hidden agenda. Jack could see that Kyle was blinded by ambition, unaware that he was being used as a pawn in Victor's larger scheme. "Victor's setting you up to fail, Kyle," Jack had warned during one of their rare, tense conversations. "You can't see it now, but he doesn't care about you or Glissade. He's only looking out for himself." But Kyle had shrugged off the warnings. His resentment toward Jack and Diane had grown too strong, fueled by his belief that they didn't trust him, that they saw him as a boy incapable of making his own decisions. Victor, on the other hand, respected him. Or so Kyle believed. The trap tightens. What Kyle didn't realize was that Victor's respect was a facade, a carefully crafted illusion to lure him into a trap. Victor's true goal was simple, to destabilize Jabot by using Kyle's newfound power at Glissade against his own family. Kyle, so desperate to prove himself and show Jack that he didn't need the Abbott name to succeed, was falling right into the plan. Kyle began making decisions that, at first glance, seemed smart and bold. But beneath the surface, every move was orchestrated to weaken Jabot's position in the market. He began poaching clients, making aggressive business deals, and expanding Glissade in ways that directly competed with Jabot. To him, it was just business, but to Jack and Diane, it was personal. They knew what was coming next, even if Kyle couldn't see it yet. "Kyle's lost," Diane whispered to Jack one evening. "He doesn't even see what he's doing. He's tearing us apart, and he's not even aware of it." Jack's heart ached. He had spent his entire life building Jabot, a company that was more than just a business, it was a family legacy. And now, his own son was unwittingly working to destroy it. Kyle's downward spiral. As Kyle continued to exert his power at Glissade, he became more alienated from his family. His once close relationship with Jack and Diane had turned cold, filled with bitter arguments and long periods of silence. Kyle no longer saw them as family, but as obstacles to his success, people who didn't believe in him and wanted to control his every move. The more distant he became, the deeper he fell into Victor's web. Victor's encouragement was all the validation Kyle needed to continue down the path of destruction. But with every step, Kyle was unknowingly tightening the noose around his own neck. His deals, while initially successful, were starting to crumble under the weight of Victor's manipulations. What Kyle had thought were bold, independent moves were actually reckless decisions that would soon lead to financial ruin for Glissade, and by extension, Jabot. And when the fallout came, Kyle would be left holding the bag, while Victor walked away unscathed. Billy's struggles and Phyllis's help. Meanwhile, across town, Billy Abbott was facing his own demons. His recent failures at Chancellor Abbott had left him in a precarious position, with Jill threatening to demote him and take full control of the company. Billy had always been brilliant, with sharp instincts and the ability to think on his feet, but his recklessness had caught up with him. Desperate for a way out of the mess he had created, Billy reached out to someone he had never thought he would turn to, Phyllis Summers. They had a complicated history, filled with equal parts affection and rivalry, but Phyllis had always been someone who understood him, even when no one else did. When Billy explained his situation, Phyllis couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy. Billy was a mess, but he was also someone she cared about, someone who had the potential to rise above the chaos he constantly found himself in. She agreed to help him, not out of obligation, but because she believed in his ability to turn things around. "You're smarter than this, Billy," Phyllis said one evening as they discussed his next moves. "You've always been able to see the angles, to know when to strike. You just lost sight of that for a while. But I know you can get it back." With Phyllis's support, Billy began to pull himself out of the hole he had dug. He refocused on Chancellor Abbott, devising a strategy to regain the trust of the board and his family. Billy's mind, sharp as ever, started working through solutions, finding ways to salvage the business and repair the damage he had caused. Phyllis was impressed by his resilience. She had always known that, beneath the reckless exterior, Billy was a man of great intelligence and potential. All he needed was a push in the right direction, and she was more than happy to give it to him. The inevitable collision. As Billy worked to redeem himself, Kyle's world was starting to unravel. The deals he had made under Victor's guidance were falling apart, and Glissade's financial stability was in jeopardy. Worse, Jack and Diane were now fully aware of the damage Kyle had done to Jabot, and the tension between them had reached a breaking point. Jack confronted Kyle in a heated exchange, trying once again to get through to his son. "You're playing with fire, Kyle. Victor doesn't care about you. He's using you to destroy everything we've built." But Kyle, blinded by his need to prove himself, refused to listen. "You don't believe in me, Dad. You never have. All you care about is Jabot and your legacy. I'm done living in your shadow." It was a heartbreaking moment for Jack, who saw his son slipping further away, consumed by ambition and mistrust. Diane, too, was devastated, knowing that Kyle's loyalty to Victor was pulling him away from the very people who loved him the most. The final betrayal. In the end, Victor's plan came to fruition. Glissade's collapse was swift, leaving Kyle with nothing but the ruins of a company he had thought would be his path to independence. Victor, of course, had already distanced himself from the wreckage, leaving Kyle to face the consequences alone. Kyle, now realizing the full extent of his mistakes, was left with the bitter truth: he had betrayed his family, destroyed his own career, and allowed Victor to use him as a pawn in his game against Jack. The shame and regret weighed heavily on him, and for the first time, he understood the price of his blind loyalty. But as Kyle stood amidst the wreckage of his life, Billy was emerging from his own. With Phyllis's help, he had managed to regain control of Chancellor Abbott, proving to Jill and the board that he still had the brilliance and drive to lead. Billy's redemption was far from complete, but he had taken the first steps toward rebuilding his career and his life. The path forward. For Kyle, the road ahead was uncertain. He had alienated his family and lost everything he had worked for. But there was still a chance for redemption, if he was willing to swallow his pride and admit his mistakes. Jack and Diane, despite everything, still loved him, and they were willing to help him if he was ready to accept it. As for Billy, his journey was just beginning. With Phyllis by his side, he was determined to prove that he could rise above his past mistakes and become the leader Chancellor Abbott needed. He was a man with the ability to see the angles, and now, with a renewed sense of purpose, he was ready to take on whatever challenges lay ahead. In Genoa City, nothing was ever simple. Family, power, and betrayal were always intertwined, and as Kyle and Billy navigated their respective paths, the future was filled with both danger and possibility. Billy's descent into despair. The weight of his failures began to take its toll on Billy. He had lost the trust of his mother, the respect of his colleagues, and now, his very identity was in question. What was he, if not a leader? If not a man who could be trusted to protect the family business? As the days passed, Billy's desperation grew. He threw himself into his work, trying to prove to Jill that he could be responsible, but the truth was, he felt like a shadow of the man he had once been. His confidence was shattered, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was nothing more than a disappointment to everyone around him. Worse, his impulsive nature began to resurface. He found himself drifting back toward his old habits: self-destruction, recklessness, and dangerous behavior. Billy was spiraling, and the more he tried to fight it, the more he felt like he was losing control.